Great editors will tell you that the top criteria for video editing is emotion, but I haven't seen any of them offer a practical method so you can start editing for emotion, and that's what we're going to do today. My name is Austen Menges, and I've been a pro editor for over 20 years with a focus on editing broadcast TV commercials with budgets of $100,000 and higher. And today I want to invite you into my edit suite into a conversation with veteran commercial director, former editor, and co-professor with Oscar-winning actor Matthew McConaughey, Scott Rice. Welcome, Scott, to the channel.
Hey, Austin. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And today we are going to give you a practical way to start adding emotion to your edits. I'm so excited to have you because not only have you edited a feature film, but now you are a director, so you've been on both sides. So I'd love to start with your take on how you think about evoking emotion in the audience, maybe even from writing and pre-production to directing to editing, and then we can kind of riff on that and offer some practical tips to the audience.
Well, sure. And just to establish, in case some people aren't convinced, that it's all about emotion. Like, we go to the cinema to be moved. We go to have an emotional experience. So that's really everything. Storytelling is about evoking emotion, evoking feelings, empathizing with the characters. And that applies to other forms of media, not just feature films, but short films, commercials, music videos. So, I decided I wanted to make films because I saw a movie called E.T. and I was so moved at age 9 that I wanted to make movies. So it's all about emotion. So when I'm directing, and this is just me, but I think a lot of directors are the same way, you're kind of feeling the emotions. You're kind of watching, whenever I watch the behind the scenes of me directing, I'm sitting there feeling the emotion of the actors, and that's combined with what the camera's doing and what the cinematography is doing and the lighting and everything. So, and I might be laughing or I might be trying to hold in laughter, but I'm feeling or just feeling delight. Like I'm literally feeling the emotions as I'm watching those takes, those raw takes being captured. And then so when I go into the editing room, it's about how do I recapture what I was feeling on set while I was experiencing those emotions, watching the raw media get recorded. So, for me, it's about, as an editor or as a director who's sitting behind an editor, is what we're creating giving me the same emotions I felt, let's say, not just on set, but when I wrote the script or when I read the script if someone else wrote it.
Oh, that's so good. And I want to point out that sometimes when editors read in the blink of an eye or they hear, oh, emotion is the top criteria, they think it's about the emotion of the characters in the scene, but that's not what we're talking about. It's such an important distinction. We're talking about the emotion of the audience. And so I've worked with Scott a lot, and when he gets, well, whether he's working on a script of a narrative feature or a short or even a commercial, he gets the storyboards, he has those emotions in mind, what he wants to feel when he sees it, what he wants the audience to feel. So he goes to set, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, you go to set knowing what you want to feel, and when you're watching the actors deliver the lines, it's working when you start to feel what you imagined you would feel. And when it's not, that's when you give them direction. And because you're trying to direct them to that emotion, and you are sort of the first audience member because you're there watching the actors.
That's a great way of putting it, that the director is, the first audience member, and then the editor is maybe the second audience member, trying to kind of find how do we convey those emotions or how do we elicit those emotions from the viewer. And some people might be inclined to say, well, this all sounds very manipulative. We're manipulating people to feel emotions. Well, I wouldn't frame it that way. It's about truth. It's about authenticity. It's about tapping into the human condition. It's about empathy and how to clearly convey an idea that the audience can empathize with so much that they literally feel an emotion, whether it be chills going up and down their spine, a lump in their throat, or just breaking out laughing. Those are all
Yes.
the types of emotions that we're going for. And that's why we sit down and watch television. That's why we go to the movies, because we want that emotional experience. And it's not a manipulation, it's a craft. And
Yep.
it's about truth. And actors, when they get in front of the camera, they're not thinking, "Oh, I'm going to try and get the audience to cry here."
No.
That's not what Matthew McConaughey is thinking when he gets in front of the camera during Interstellar and breaks down.
No.
He's
Yeah.
going
So
for
great.
truth. He's going
Yes.
for an authentic emotional reaction. And then the idea is, if that is truly authentic, the audience will recognize its authenticity and feel an emotion as well, even though he's playing a character.
I want to give some practical steps. So, in my editing course, which you could check out below, I go deeper on this, but I would say the simplest way to start doing this is before you start editing, pick a target emotion. And it's probably not a target emotion for your entire edit. It's probably a few target emotions based on the different story beats. And it could be as simple as selecting those emotions and writing them down. And that's particularly helpful if you just get a batch of footage from a producer or a content creator. Say you're editing a YouTube video. You might have to come up with those emotions. Now, if you have the opportunity, like I do, to work with a great director, like I get to do with Scott, he has those ideas. So that might just be a conversation with Scott where we're looking at the scripts. We've maybe been to the shoot together. Maybe I'm looking at the rough footage, and we just have some talks. What are we going for here? What's the most important thing we want the audience to feel? If we do our job right, what is the audience feeling? Do you agree with that, Scott? Do you have anything to add to sort of that first point, or any examples that you can bring up where that worked for you?
Intuitively, I know when I'm cutting something, I will have an idea of how I want to ride that emotion, where I want the emotion to sort of crescendo, for example, let's say at the end of the piece. And when I feel the emotion, I'm like, okay, we've landed the plane, we're there. And even after
That's
years,
cool.
I recently showed a short documentary to my wife that I made, gosh, maybe 10 years ago, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. And I showed it to her, and she just broke down crying at the
Oh
end of the
man, that's
piece.
great.
And I was feeling emotion. I had a big lump in my throat, and I'm like, wow, that really worked, because the subject was on camera. The person being interviewed was being very authentic and very vulnerable. And we figured out how to kind of bring out that authenticity and that emotion through how we structured it and the music and all the amazing tools that we had at our disposal. But we never would have achieved that had we not been very intentional about where those little emotional hits land in the piece.
And Scott, you brought up some stuff that I think takes us right into point two. So this is point two, practical tip. So if you follow tip one, before you start editing, you kind of have some ideas of what emotions you want the audience to feel. Now it's time to get into technique. But guess what? You use all the tools available to you to hit that emotion. And Scott talked about two, I think, of the most important tools. One is performance, and two is music. Scott, talk about some techniques that we can use as editors to enhance the emotional targets that we've set out from the start.
So yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of techniques. Music's a big one. Where those music hit in combination with what's going on with the performance is good. The shot that you use. So let's say you have just one performance, but you got it from 2 or 3 different angles. What camera you're using will make a difference. That's big in documentary. How you
Yes.
structure something, where you choose to put that emotional moment in the story is going to make a difference in terms of, do you make the audience feel that empathy or not? If you're trying to get a laugh, sometimes it's just about that frame. It's in the fine cutting. Is it this frame or is it this frame that makes it funnier? Is it about this sound effect or this sound effect that makes it funnier? Should the sound be a little louder? you know,
Oh my gosh.
there's so many tiny little ways you can manipulate. It might be a reposition, so it might repo a shot. Maybe it was just a little too wide. If you go in a touch tighter, then you notice the glint in the character's eyes. You know, notice the eye light. You notice what the cinematographer was doing. And then you notice that there's a little bit of a tear in the person's eye. But that didn't happen unless you did that little, 5% punch in. So there's all these tiny little ways we can, move the emotion around, direct the audience's attention to notice what makes a difference in terms of what's going to give them an emotional experience.
And I've been guilty of this many, many times, but before I would do projects, before I kind of hit this practical way of doing things where you start with the emotional idea, sometimes you just dive into an edit and you get down the road and you're doing all this hard work. Like, it's a lot of work to do a music edit and think about, oh, does this need to be punched in here? Do I have the right reaction shot? And it just falls flat. And it's because you weren't going toward a purpose. So that's what I really want to get across. And actually, I didn't tell Scott I was going to do this in advance, but I wanted to show a clip from the short film he directed, Treasure Imagination, which has been on my channel a bunch, and it's how I teach my course, going behind the scenes of this short. And I just wanted to show how important reaction shots are, and particularly I'm going to just show this scene of the main protagonist when he kind of gets to his lowest emotional point, and then we can kind of talk about how he came to these decisions. So let me play.
¡La sombrilla! ¡Agarra la sombrilla! ¡Vámonos ya! ¡Get off! ¡Pégale! ¡Más fuerte! ¡Dale la cabeza! ¡Eso nos pertenece a nosotros! ¡It's mine!
All right, so that was a big moment, Scott, and we really labored over that sequence, over how many times we would cut to him, how many frames we'd be on him. What is his final action before we start Act 3 in the jungle? And we were always going for that point because it's a point where he makes a decision, and it all happens visually, and that's your mastery, a master of directing performances and getting all that. And having this, I felt like we came to a great point where it's elevating, getting more intense, his feelings as he realizes hopelessness kind of crescendos, and then a decision that he's going to change as a character. And that's one of my favorite scenes, but it was all about having that target emotion. So can you walk us through how you felt about that in the script stage, and then when you shot it, and then honing it in the edit?
So when I wrote it, I kind of knew he's low, he's building his confidence, he's starting to make a decision, and then he makes the decision that he can overcome his fear and go after this guy. So that was kind of, there were like three little acts. He's low, he's building his confidence, and then he decides he can do it. So that's kind of what I thought. And then when I shot it, I knew we'd be cross-cutting between this little fight scene and him reacting. And it was important to me to get a lot of coverage as the camera moves in on him making his decision. And I originally thought we would move into him, we'd see his decision in his eyes, and then we just would cut to the next scene where he's chasing the guy through the jungle. But when I shot it, I was like, no, we better have him just to have him dash off screen, to establish the beginning of that chase. So we had that piece, and sure enough, Austen in his wisdom knew to use that piece, even though I felt like we wouldn't actually use it. So then in the cutting of it, there were so many pieces that I shot. I did all this coverage of these wide shots pushing in, mediums pushing in, now close-up pushing in. And I knew in editorial we would just decide, but there were so many options. I was like, well, I think this shot is really cool where we're low, and boy, he really looks like Indiana Jones, and he looks so tall and empowered, and we're pushing in from a low angle. And we had, one or two too many shots in the sequence.
Yeah.
So then it became about, gosh, this just feels cutty. I'm distracted. I'm not feeling the emotion. Clearly, the filmmakers can't let go of their babies. They can't kill their darlings. They just have all these shots they want to cram in. So it became a subtractive process. It was, in order to feel the emotion, we had to cut one or two shots. We even had to cut some pieces from the fight scene, because it became about the fight and not about the emotionality of our protagonist watching the fight. And we didn't want it to become about the fight choreography. It really just had to be about his emotions as he's overcoming his fear, and then, resolving to go after this bad guy that has stolen his golden idol, and he wants that thing back. For me, when I just watched it, what really gave me emotion was, starting with him on the ground, standing. There's this kind of beginning, because we almost cut out the standing part too.
Right.
I thought maybe it would be too slow or boring. Maybe we should just cut to him already standing. There was something about using the act of standing that stood in for the idea of picking himself up and beginning to fight his fear. So we included the stand. That was an important choice. We included the push in that really, and I think we juiced it in the edit. We added a little bit of a digital zoom to that push in to give it a little bit more momentum as he really wells up with courage to go after this guy. So there's that push in, and then the musician decided to really give a hit there. That became a significant moment. Without music, it didn't have the emotionality that it does with the musical score in, the musician choosing to really hit that moment. And I think, Austen, in your temp music, you decided to put a little hit there, so the musician knew to put a hit there. And that's a great way an editor can use a temp score to try and build that emotion. And then, the decision to have him run off screen, again, was very key. Not only does he make that decision, but he combines that with a physical choice to run off screen, and the editor, Austen, kept that in. And then you have this real momentum and resolve going into the next scene where he's running, chasing the guy through the jungle.
Well said, Scott, and shout out to Pat Murray, the composer. He's incredible, so thank you, Pat. Okay, so some of you might be asking out there, we have step 1, pick an emotional target. Step 2, use all of the techniques you have at your disposal as you're learning them to hit those emotional targets. You might be asking, okay, but how do I know if I've hit it? And this brings us to something that's extremely, extremely important to me and Scott, and that is showing your work to an audience. It is so important, and I cannot emphasize it enough how much it will change you as a filmmaker, and particularly as an editor, is to get comfortable getting feedback. And Scott and I did, I don't know how many cuts of Treasure Imagination. There's literally hundreds of sequences. I think the final thing was like sequence 152 or something. And along the way, probably about 10 or 12 times, we took rough cuts and we showed them to people. Sometimes we'd play them for people live in the room, which is a particularly helpful way to get feedback. Because, Scott, isn't it true that you can almost feel how well your cut is doing when you're watching it live with another person? It's almost like takes blinders off. Like boring parts feel extra boring. Funny parts that hit feel extra funny. But then all the way to sending out a link on Frame.io and saying, what did you think? And asking follow-up questions. Scott's a professor at an amazing film school, so he has oftentimes has a class full of students. And one thing I love that he does is he'll show our rough cuts to his class, to a live audience. So Scott, tell everybody, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, tell everybody how important step 3 is, which is check your work. See if you're hitting the emotions you're targeting by showing your work to a real audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do is we choose to show an audience when we think we've got it. So that's intuitive.
True.
So you're in a room with your editor, maybe it's the director and an editor, maybe a producer, and you guys are kind of feeling the emotion. You're getting choked up, or you feel like you're getting the laughs. You kind of laugh yourself. So you're like, okay, I think we're there, but let's go test it. So you go show it to an audience. And usually it's best to have a room full of people, especially with comedy. It's hard to know if you got the laugh if you don't see 50% or more of the people sort of laughing out loud if a joke or something is intended to be laugh out loud funny. So that's important. You could show it to a smaller crowd or one or two people, but I really recommend, especially for narrative or something that's going to go to film festivals, get a crowd of people, get a small audience or bigger audience if you can. But it's really important to see if people are feeling emotion. Like Austen said, you kind of feel like these blinders come off. You feel almost naked when you show your piece to an audience. You feel this vulnerability because you don't have the safety of all the people on the project who drank the Kool-Aid and think it's cool, and think it's amazing just because it exists. Now it's people who are like, oh, you're taking up my time to show me something. They're less enthusiastic than you are about your work. And now you get the sense of whether or not they're actually really into it. And whether or not they're into it really depends on the emotion they're feeling while they watch the piece. Is it making them laugh? Is it making them feel empathy? Is it making them feel exhilarated? All these things, whether or not it works depends on whether or not they're feeling the emotion. And you can just feel it in the room. You can feel it. If there's no laughs and it's supposed to get laughs, if it's supposed to move people, you can tell when they're not moved. You can tell when people are bored. You can just feel it in the room. Without even looking at them, you could feel it. It's weird.
Yeah, it's like a mounting tension. It feels heavy. I was going to say 2 emotions you don't want them to feel, but will almost 100% happen when you first screen it is boredom, and you'll realize where you need to tighten up, and then confusion. Where something didn't make sense. And what confusion does is it takes you can't even have an emotion because you don't even know what's going on. You've been taken out of the story. But man, that is so helpful. So in a quick summary, pick a target emotion and just start doing it. It might take a lot of time for you to see direct results in the quality of your edits, but like any good habit, start it now, be consistent. Over time, it will happen. And then as you learn new editing techniques, use them in support of that emotion. And then finally, check your work by showing your work to people to see if you're hitting those target emotions. Thank you so much for being on today. Please, everybody, go follow Scott. His links are below. He has a great Instagram following, and he's going to be posting more on YouTube. So follow him in both places. If you like content like this, you should check out my free editing guide, which you can download at the link below. And if you'd like to go deeper, have a deeper exploration of how to use emotion on a real project where I personally give you feedback, you can check out my editing course. And if you like this video, you should watch this one next. Happy editing.